I will introduce Desmond O'Neill. I met him in September last year in Helsinki at the UGMS conference of the Geriatric Medicine Conference, the European one. And he's a geriatrician and a critical gerontologist, maybe more a critical gerontologist than a geriatrician. Let's see. And he works at the University Hospital in Dublin and at the Trinity College Dublin and at the M₃O University. And he has done a lot of work in many areas, but I would like to highlight that he's very wise, very smart, and he knows a lot about also arts and humanities, which is also very important for our health and social issues in life. Thank you very much, Desmond.
Thanks. It's a great pleasure to be here. And I have to say, Vic, it's a beautiful town and this is a very dynamic university. And the research group here is widely recognized outside as of the highest quality and standard and really adding a lot to what we know about aging and rethinking aging. So I'm trying to focus this morning on actually us turning our gaze inwards upon ourselves and what's our role in rethinking ageism and aging, making it personal. And at the beginning, I'd like to start out with an interesting quote from the poet T.S. Eliot. He said there were two elements or two responses to every issue in life. And the first one is, what are we going to do about it? And that's what we spend the first 10 or 15 years of our professional lives learning, the techniques and technologies and approaches towards how can we support aging. But the more important question really is, what does it mean and how do I relate to it? And this is really a key point in gerontology and all of us who engage with aging. To what extent, what does aging really mean? And what does it, how do I personally relate to it? And a slide I'm going to put up 3 times today is really the core of the talk. What does aging mean for me? More importantly, do I welcome my own aging? And again, out there in the public domain, we see anti-aging creams. We see a lot of negativity towards growing old. Even to say, you know, you're looking younger is a compliment. Actually, you've got to think about that. What's wrong with being old? Why is looking younger a compliment? And lastly, do I, or does my language as a professional in whatever area I'm in, other older people as a different group, but hey, that's not me. So I nearly always start my talks with this picture. It's 3 meters by 3 meters. It's the most popular picture in the Tate Modern in London. It's a radical new style of creating art for the artist. And it's created by an 83-year-old who is bedbound and chairbound. And it neatly catches together the growth and loss that occurs with age, but also how the loss and frailty and awareness of your vulnerability is actually an agent for searching for meaning, for self-actualization, and for personal achievement. Matisse always painted standing up until he had an operation which affected that he could no longer stand up. And his hands and eyes were fine, but he found he could not paint sitting down or lying down in bed. So he completely changed his style to a thing called decoupage. And all his most successful, widely diffused works come from this stage. And again, being in Catalonia, I think it's only right to point out some of your great artists who've continued to create into later life, Frédéric Montpeau, Juan Miro, and Pablo Picasso, and indeed very often very radical art in the face of frailty and vulnerability. Indeed, very often contemporary critics could not understand the great art of late life, particularly of Picasso, which was derided, but now has found a very secure place. So what does aging mean? And one of the nice phrases, I think, from gerontology is that we're born copies, but we die as originals. So aging is potentially the richest stage of life. And do we, in our own heart, say, yes, that is going to be the most rich stage of my life? And yet there's going to be frailty, there's going to be vulnerability. And how do we bring together these complex ideas that there can be high achievement, but major challenges and losses? And one area here is the philosopher Yulia Kristeva around the issue of abjection. And how do we bring together glorification and abjection? So it's around thinking aging is complexity and it's growth and loss. And when you're 7, there are things you can no longer do that you did when you were 2. You can't fall as easily. You can't learn a language. You can't learn a whole pile of things. You will never learn as easily at 7 as you learned at 2. But we don't grieve the age of 7 as a time of loss. So at all stages, aging is growth and loss. And loss can be the engine of change and strength. And here I would point you to Laura Carstenson's socio-emotional selectivity theory, that it is the very awareness of finitude and vulnerability that makes us search towards meaning. And Gadov has this very helpful, quite a way back, concept that frailty is at once a limit and a freedom. And this is radical very often for those of us who are trying in the health arena to be preventing frailty, to be treating frailty, but actually to understand that it's part and parcel of what we do. The freedom to lavish all of one's intensity on the creation of a new self-body relation, which the body is not a mere object, but a subject, a beloved whose so-called imperfections are an essential part of the whole. And a picture can convey 1,000 words. And I often think that the Japanese art of kintsugi, whereby we bring back together the broken elements and by so doing create something which is new. So I have to say, I love being a geriatrician. If I'm going to be recreated, reborn, if I were a Buddhist, I want to be a geriatrician again, because it's dealing with the richness of life and seeing that and identifying it with is really important. So we keep coming back to the question, what does aging mean to me personally? Do I welcome my own aging? And do I other older people? So I think it's always important to start with your own family. And one of the great puzzles for me as a gerontologist and geriatrician is we generally feel warm and supportive, everybody, the whole population, warm and supportive feelings for our parents, our grandparents. On the left is my paternal grandfather getting married in 1907. On the right, my parents. And you can tell that's me. You can tell my age by the type of pram that I'm in. And yet, we then talk about older people, or that unfortunate phrase, the elderly, or we're dealing with older people, or old age, as if it's something totally different. And of course, the challenge of ageism, it's the most bizarre discrimination, because racism or sexism is nearly always against other people, not against me. Very few of us will change. But aging is a discrimination against our future selves. In English, we talk about turkeys voting for Christmas when you do something stupid. But in fact, it's not only turkeys voting for Christmas, but they're self-basting and preheating the oven if we do ageism. So I don't have to tell an audience like this about how widespread ageism or its destructive effects. One of the things that's very helpful are numerous studies that show that you, as an older person, if you go into hospital thinking that old age is not a good thing, you will do less well, you will stay longer, you're more likely to die and more likely to go to a nursing home, all other things being compared. So it's absolutely critical for all of us to understand and for the whole population to begin to welcome aging. And of course, one of the challenges, do we as geriatricians and health gerontologists welcome aging? And there's much to suggest in our literature, if you read between the lines and do an analysis, is actually we are ambivalent about aging and that we have challenges. So Danielle spoke about Ignaz Nasher, who is the first person to crystallize out the concept of geriatrics. Of course, there was much literature on old age before that. But look what Nasher said in his textbook, and it's a great textbook. We realize that for all practical purposes, that the lives of the aged are useless, that they are often a burden to themselves, their family, and the community at large. Their appearance is generally unaesthetic, their actions objectionable, their very existence often an incubus to those who in their humanity or duty take upon themselves the care of the aged. So we can see from the very beginning is we have within the DNA an othering and a fear of aging. So a classic example is the use of the word elderly. Now, this is an interesting one for people for whom English is second, third, or fourth language. But the United Nations Human Rights Committee and older people's organizations in Europe have said, please do not use the word elderly. It has no good sense in any context. And yet, even within geriatric medicine, we take the geriatric medicine abstract book, the word elderly is used very frequently. Now, sometimes it's because people, as I say, it's a second, third, or fourth language. But it's a real, we need to think hard about the language that we use when we're talking about aging. And it's not just the language. We undertook a study of how normal aging is described in textbooks, both of gerontology and geriatric medicine. Now, as we get older, we get smarter. Je grauer, je schlauer, as the Germans would say. And as La Rochefoucauld says, en vieillissant, on devient plus fou et plus sage. In growing old, we become more mad and more wise. But look how they describe normal aging. For example, older drivers are the safest drivers on the road. Despite all their medical conditions, they're smart. So 87% describe normal cognitive aging in terms of loss. So we are creating the negativity around aging within our own disciplines, and we need to be careful about it. So it really is important as health gerontologists to really think hard about the broader sciences of gerontology to try and support us. And again, if you're interested, I've written about this in JAGS. Am I a gerontologist or a geriatrician? I'd give you a very ambivalent answer. But one of the challenges is that gerontology itself is split up into many different sections. So we have social gerontology, biological gerontology, aging policy, psychology of aging, and a little bit like the famous story of the blind men describing the element. How do we step back and get a broader vision? And again, Danielle has mentioned people like Stephen Katz. And I think what we're increasingly seeing is that a key lens for viewing aging is aging through the arts and humanities. It's either where critical gerontology meets cultural gerontology. And what I like about it, it has a very ambivalent, ambiguous, and vague definition. This is from Wendy Martin and Julia Twigg. It's that cultural gerontology is a broad and conflicting usage, a tendency, a field. But coming back to T.S. Eliot at the beginning, and what I said to you all about what does aging mean to you, with a central focus on meaning, a desire to transcend old paradigms and to bring a fuller, richer account of later years, redressing gerontology and geriatrics neglect. If you're interested, there's two key textbooks. The Tom Cole in the US, who's very much at the origin of this, has had a series of textbooks, handbooks on humanities and aging. And the most recent one is with Marion Goldman, Kate de Medeiros, and Tom Cole, Critical Humanities and Aging. And there's now the Rutledge Handbook of Cultural Gerontology and Conflict of Interest Statement. I have a chapter in the one on the left, and I'll have a chapter in the second one, an edition of the one on the right. But look at the power of what a really clever, smart artist can tell us about aging. So many of you might know Ursula Le Guin as a famous science fiction author. Well, as gerontologists, health gerontologists, social gerontologists, I would direct you towards her wonderful book written in her 80s called No Time to Spare. And it's based on this awful poster that old age isn't for sissies. I've known clear-headed, clear-hearted people in their 90s. They didn't think they were young. They knew with a patient, canny clarity how old they were. If I'm 90 and believe I'm 45, I'm headed for a very bad time trying to get out of the bathtub. Even if I'm 70 and I think I'm 40, I'm fooling myself almost to the extent of almost certainly acting like an awful fool. But here's a lovely bit about that dreadful poster, old age isn't for sissies. Look at me, I snarl at them. I can't run. I can't lift barbells. And the thought of me in a tight-fitting minimal clothing is appalling in all ways. I am a sissy. I always was. Who are you jocks to say old age isn't for me? The compensations of getting old, such as they are, aren't in the field of athletic prowess. I think that's why the saying and the poster annoy me so much. They're not only insulting to sissies, they're beside the point. I'd like a poster showing two old people with stooped backs and arthritic hands and time-worn faces sitting talking deep in conversation. And the slogan would be, old age is not for the young. So this is a really rich and interesting area. I was fortunate enough to work with our National Theatre to do a version of Shakespeare's A Midsummer's Night Dream, where all the actors were over 60, some over 70, and 2 over 80. Instead of worrying about his daughter marrying the wrong person, he was worrying about his mother marrying the wrong person, and it was set in a nursing home. And the fantastic thing was the actors had to adapt because some of them had frailties and vulnerabilities. One of them was meant to fall, but he couldn't fall. So we completely changed the process. And I think what was lovely about the Lancet second highest impact factor of any medical journal is really willing to take cultural gerontology. And what they bring out is once we glimpse the inner life and complexity of older people, we cannot retreat to a vision defined by their disability. So what this allows us to do is work out how come UNICEF and all the organizations for children work easily with pediatricians, but age advocacy has a real challenge of dealing with the abjection of old age, dealing with nursing homes, and dealing with health gerontologists. And Susan Pickard, a wonderful cultural gerontologist in Liverpool, has pointed out that geriatric medicine largely arose because governments saw old age as a problem and saw geriatric medicine and health gerontology as a solution to the problem of old age, instead of being, as I would like to call it, a guardian of the longevity dividend. So we are unwittingly associated with the problematization of old age. We hear older people saying, my cardiologist, my neurologist. How many older people do we hear saying, my geriatrician? So that we need to be aware of this, and it helps us find solutions. So one of the great solutions, and I have to say, this is, can I direct you all towards this wonderful initiative? This is an initiative between academics, the American Gerontological Society of America, the American Geriatric Society, advocacy, to bring together a reframing of how we talk about age and how we confront ageism. And it's about bringing it into two major elements. The first thing is confronting injustice. So advancing a candid conversation about ageism. And secondly, embracing the dynamic. Casting the aging population, which they are, as we know, as an opportunity for society. But do we all truly believe that? And that's the key question for all of us. So here's some nice examples from it. But if you put a group of younger people through a reframing aging course, short course, you reduce ageist thinking by 30%. So it's quite powerful. Language shapes what we do. So instead of these words, the tsunami or the tidal wave of aging, and similarly catastrophic terms for the growing population of older adults, try, as you're talking affirmatively about changing demographics, as Europeans live longer and healthier lives. Instead of choice, planning, control. And I think Danielle nicely talked about the framing and disciplining of old age and other individual determinants of aging outcomes, emphasizing how to improve the social context. Let's find creative solutions to ensure that we can all thrive as we age. Instead of these words, and I've spoken about seniors, elderly, aging dependence, othering, and this is what I said to early, do we other old age? Do we instead think of it as us as we age? Using more neutral, older people, older Europeans, and inclusive we and us terms. I have to, my favorite term for aging is modeled on the disability sector. So people with disability refer to us not as able-bodied people, but as the presently able-bodied people. So really, we should be talking about us as we age and changing the direction of the tanker of social policy takes a long time. So what we're doing now affects us as we age. Avoiding combat, and this has really been interesting. We see this also in the cancer and dementia literature: struggle, battle, fight, conflict-oriented words to describe aging experiences, the building momentum metaphor. Aging is a dynamic process that leads to new abilities and knowledge we can share with our communities. And again, avoid using the word ageism without explanation. So ageism is a discrimination against older people due to negative and inaccurate stereotypes. So just some examples of how we can go wrong and how traps we might avoid. So there was two old age psychiatrists or geropsychiatrists described in the New England Journal of Medicine recruitment difficulties they had with getting people joining geropsychiatry or old age psychiatry. But look how they describe older people as a tsunami. Is there anything good about a tsunami? There's nothing good about a tsunami. So let's stop using, no wonder people don't want to come to geropsychiatry if you describe our task as dealing with the silver tsunami rather than helping the longevity dividend. One of my particular bugbears is when people do not use a lifespan approach to loneliness. And it is a real challenge because in many ways, much of the work on loneliness has arisen from gerontology, but unfortunately and unwittingly, it now has in many countries and across the world caricatured loneliness as a key feature of later life. In fact, in most Western society, loneliness peaks between the ages of 15 and 35. And if I will reject or alter papers sent to me to review around loneliness in later life if they don't adequately tie it in with loneliness in the rest of life. Because if you only study loneliness in older people, you misplace an emphasis, you further stigmatize older people, but you're actually diverting from life course solutions that could help people across the lifespan. And clearly it's important for us all to experience loneliness at some stage, just like stress. Stress and loneliness are integral parts of what we do. And it undermines intergenerational solidarity. If you design for the old, Bernard Isaac said, you include the young. If you design for the young, you exclude the old. So loneliness across the lifespan is a massive opportunity that we need to be careful we're not missing out on. Again, Danielle mentioned successful aging. Successful aging has had its day. It was a useful phrase back when Cannon Rowe brought it in to perhaps re-changing the whole dialogue of negativity about later life. But now it has outlived its purpose because it creates a framework of what successful aging is. And if you don't meet that framework, well, the opposite of successful is failure. Okay. And I love this paper from Howard Bergman's group in Canada. I'm only sorry they didn't put it into a more major journal. The Lancet would have eaten it up. I may be frail, but I ain't no failure. And what we should be looking at is optimal aging, which places aging as what the older person themselves says, this is what I think to be right. And time again in longitudinal studies in aging, we know that how the older person rates their well-being always always outperforms the so-called objective measures of disability or frailty. So we need to rethink our language. Again, another phrase that should now be lost. And again, people meant it well, caregiver burden. Do we talk about a caregiver burden about looking after children? Do we? I don't think so. This awful picture there, the negativity, negative iconography, comes from a JAMA, Journal of the Medical Association, a JAMA paper about caregiver burden, where in fact what it is, as one of my carers said to me, my moment of turning was, I want to look after my mother, caring, and we know caring is part of our moral development. It should actually be burdensome aspects of care. And that allows us to fill it out and support the areas that are burdensome. So I know we've got carer burden surveys, and it's no disrespect to Zarit, but it's time for us actually to have a burdensome aspects of care survey, not a carer burden survey. Okay. So the good news is you can change the ship. So I was very impressed when people say, what's the publication you're most proud of? Usually letters to journal are considered to be academic debris. But a group of us got together and wrote to the Lancet to say we are concerned about the negativity in the way in which aging was framed. And we were really pleased. The Lancet's very well disposed towards aging. And if you wish to publish there, they actually put this on the front cover of the Lancet. So it's what I'm proudest of all the papers we have written. Aging is most often framed in negative terms, questioning whether health services, welfare provision, and economic growth are sustainable. We argue that instead of being portrayed as a problem, increased human longevity should be a cause for celebration. So look, it's a small change, it's a tilt, who knows? And when we're talking to our trainees, instead of saying you're here as a group to fix frailty, incontinence, falls, or stroke, we're actually trying to say to them that you are guardians of the longevity dividend. Society has given us a really interesting role whereby aging is the most fantastic social change of the last century. We are now gaining in life years, gaining in most countries, unless some concerns in the UK and the USA that rising inequality is actually eroding some of the healthy life expectancy. But we're here, you here in the room today and online, you are the guardians of the longevity dividend. And that's a really, really nice thing to be. And actually, it makes your life much better if you can reshape your life in this way. And it doesn't mean you don't understand frailty and vulnerability and that you're not trying to promote optimal aging, but this is what we do. So I'm going to finish off on aging. As I said to you, aging is the most bizarre of discriminations because it's not against other people, it's against our own future selves. And our Irish poet, W.B. Yeats, had a lovely phrase that out of the quarrel with others, we make rhetoric. But out of the quarrel with ourselves, we make poetry. So I'm going to finish with a slide from the 90th year of Czesław Miłosz, the Polish-American Nobel Prize winning poet. And it's about actually the gains and losses of old age. Not soon, as late as the approach of my 90th year, I felt a door opening in me, and I entered the clarity of early morning. One after another, my former lives were departing like ships together with their sorrow. And the countries, cities, gardens, the bays of seas assigned to my brush came closer, ready now to be described better than they were before. Thank you very much.